From high, snowy mountains to the sun-baked wilderness. Forests, meadows and quiet waters. The Dead Sea and the flowering desert. Animals from Europe, Asia and Africa, where 3 continents meet. This is the nature of the Holy Land. This green and fertile valley is watered by the best-known stream in the world. Venerated by Christians for nearly 2,000 years, the river was significant to the Jews 1,000 years before that, as the threshold of the Promised Land. The baptismal movement started in about 250 AD, when Christians began coming here to confirm their faith in the waters where Jesus himself was baptized. The river supports a wide variety of life, both in its waters and along its banks. It has always been subject to seasonal variations, but it's now more and more under human control. Parts of it can never be controlled. From its beginnings in the mountains to its end in the Dead Sea, the River Jordan is full of life. The Jordan Valley lies at the meeting place of Europe, Africa and Asia. It's a long, narrow oasis between the arid lands to east and west of its course. The Jordan draws its waters from the snows of Mount Hermon on Israel's northern border. From this alpine landscape, 3 small streams, the Hasbani, the Banyas and the Dan, combine to form the Jordan itself. Together they will flow to the lowest point on the Earth's surface, 160 kilometers to the south. The upper Jordan has carved its course through basalt hills, a steep mountainous stream bubbling through rock-strewn gorges. 60 kilometers from its source, it glides into the Sea of Galilee, at 209 meters below sea level, the lowest freshwater lake in the world. It's 21 kilometers long and 12 wide, and 44 meters at its deepest point. The Sea of Galilee is the principal source of fresh water for the whole of Israel. Where the Jordan flows out of the southern end of the sea, its character changes. It becomes a winding, leisurely river, the natural border between Israel and the Kingdom of Jordan. It's 100 kilometers in a straight line, but the river makes it 200. Reluctantly, it meanders into the heart of the Judean desert and its terminus in the Dead Sea, the lowest land surface on Earth. Human exploitation of the Jordan began in 1928, when Jewish settlers built dams to harness its waters for hydroelectricity and irrigation. Later, in the 1950s, the Hula swamp above the Sea of Galilee was drained, for agriculture and to control the malaria that made that part of Israel uninhabitable. The Hula was 60 square kilometers of papyrus thickets and open water. All but 3 square kilometers were drained, removing the habitat of untold numbers of plants and animals, many of them unknown to science. The result was a level plain of rich agricultural land, which for a number of years bore generous crops of corn and cotton. It was not until the 90s that things began to go wrong. After the success of the Hula drainage, attention turned once more to the lower Jordan. A dam south of the lake was closed in 1964 to divert water to the parched land below. In the words of the Bible, the desert blossomed like a rose. Its productivity is maintained by water pouring down the national carrier, a canal 250 kilometers long from the Sea of Galilee to the Negev Desert in the south. The wonders of irrigation and the crops that could be grown in the desert diverted people's attention from the condition of the lower Jordan. A few scientists realized uneasily that with its flow reduced to a fifth, the river had become sluggish and brackish. Its banks were still green, but the plant and animal life had changed. This unease spread to the Hula Valley. It gave rise to a movement for the conservation of nature and soon to the establishment of Israel's first nature reserve, in the 5% of the swamp that had not been drained. Here, where European water lilies grow alongside the papyrus of Africa, a sanctuary was at last established. The reserve protected not only the native flora and fauna, but also the huge numbers of migrant birds for whom this is a vital staging post on their journey. White pelicans fly in on their way to Africa from their breeding grounds in Eastern Europe. About 70,000 of them arrive each year, stopping in the Hula Valley for 2 or 3 weeks to rest and feed. The native water buffalo are a relic of the days when they were used as beasts of burden. Their every footstep is followed by cattle egrets, hunting the insects they disturb from the grass. Wild boars have always lived here. Some of the ducks come here to breed, and others to spend the winter. The Hula Reserve, small though it is, has proved a boon for the cormorants that arrive every autumn. In January 1983, there were 162 of them. By 1994, their numbers had risen 30-fold to nearly 3,500. Below a party of pelicans soaring over the edge of the reserve lies the battlefield between man and bird. Fish ponds are an important source of protein in Israel, where breeding and harvesting has been developed to a fine art. When the ponds are drained to gather the catch, the birds move in. The reserve no longer holds enough fish to satisfy so many appetites, and the fish ponds are a convenient alternative. A few herons do little damage, but when a whole flock of pelicans swoops down, even before the time for the fish harvest, the fish farmers have good cause for alarm. Scooping with their bills in the shallow water, the pelicans can swallow a substantial proportion of the season's production, sometimes with difficulty. When they're joined by ravenous cormorants diving to take fish below the reach of the pelican's bills, the combined effect can be little short of a disaster. Charming and industrious though the birds may be, and they certainly offer an unrivaled spectacle, all these hungry bills constitute a challenge which the fish farmers cannot ignore. Eventually, they were forced to take action. killing pelicans is against the law, no matter what the provocation. All that can be done is to scare them into flight. But where to? The flock merely takes the problem to the next fish pond. Cormorants became such a pest in the autumn of 1993 that the fishermen were granted a license to shoot them. One of their number proved especially successful. He was too efficient. After only 5 days, public opinion was such that the license was withdrawn. The disturbance changed the behavior of the pelicans to something never seen before. From their customary roosts on the water or in nearby fields, they began to move to trees, where they could spend the day keeping out of trouble. They are plainly not designed to perch high above the ground, but they will go to any lengths in search of peace. In autumn, the Jordan runs very low, waiting for the return of the wet season. Mountain gazelles spar in the dusty heat, settling their territorial disputes in time for the coming mating season. The victorious male has the right to mate with any females passing through his territory. The gazelle, whose population is flourishing along the banks of the Jordan, is the national emblem of Israel. The emblems of autumn are 2 flowers, sea squill and a yellow amaryllis. Both blossom before the rains arrive. Driven from the ponds by the fish farmers, the cormorants make their way to the lake, where they can fish unhindered. The principal catch of fishermen in the lake is tilapia, or St. Peter's fish, which maintains the quality of the water by eating algae which would otherwise make it unusable. To protect the fish, both the number and the size the fishermen can take are strictly limited. The cormorants have no such limit on their catch. Unlike the fishermen blindly sweeping their net through the water, the birds chase their prey by sight, diving as much as 9 meters below the surface in search of a meal. They are phenomenally successful. After 6 dry months, the coming of the wet season is eagerly awaited by all the inhabitants of the Jordan Valley. The herald of change comes in October. It's the Sharqiyah, a strong wind from the east that is soon followed by rain-bearing depressions sweeping in from the Mediterranean. It churns up the waters of Galilee, carrying oxygen to the depths and bringing up nutrients from the lake bottom. This annual stirring regenerates the lake. It was a sudden violent storm such as this that Jesus calmed when the disciples were so afraid. Towards the end of summer, dark clouds cover the sun, and the first blessed rainstorm thunders across the valley. The rain that dapples the surface of the lake is falling also high in the hills, the catchment area for the Jordan. The rate of flow in the river rises from its summer level of 1.5 cubic meters per second to a winter torrent 100 times greater. The silver stream turns gold with silt as the river roars down towards the lake. At the southern end, the dams are opened to protect the lake shores from flooding, and the torrent is released into the lower Jordan. Before people began manipulating the Jordan, these winter floods were a regular event, but now they occur only in years of high rainfall when the needs of humans have been satisfied. The result enriches the parched ground to the south of the lake, covering it with silt from the upper reaches of the river. It's late February, towards the end of a good wet winter. A fox guards the entrance to his earth safely above the highest water level, while his female nurses their litter of 5 cubs. Foxes are among the few predators left in Israel since the lion and the bear were wiped out. Their only competition in the Jordan Valley now comes from the few jackals and wolves to survive. In this mild climate, a small predator can have an easy life. But the climate is not always this mild. In 1992, there was a winter such as no one had seen before in Israel. Snow fell on the hills of Galilee and in the Golan Heights and on the whole length of the Jordan Valley. The unprecedented low temperatures brought great beauty to the valley and great hardship to its animal inhabitants. For a griffon vulture soaring above the snowbound plains, food was plentiful. There were many casualties that winter. Mountain gazelles have great difficulty moving about when the ground is covered in snow. Unlike their cousins from colder climates, they don't know how to dig for food. Many of them died in that hard winter. Even when they were able to find a bite of food exposed by the wind, they died of thirst. They did not know that they could eat snow in the absence of water to drink. A lone jackal, his coat fluffed out against the cold, stumbles through the unfamiliar element. He's close to the gazelles, but quite unable to give chase. A rare wild cat has the same problem, compounded by a case of cold feet. There was nothing for storks to eat on the river bank. The wild cat seems to have inherited the skills of his northern cousins, who are accustomed to hunting unseen prey in winter. He listens for sounds beneath the snow. a vole perhaps, or some other small creature. Such poor feeding was not enough to keep the dog fox alive. He perished, leaving his mate in the earth to look after the cubs. They are snug enough underground, but very hungry. The vixen now has only 2 cubs left. She probably ate the others when they died to recycle their energy into milk for the survivors. Now she awaits milder weather and the chance to hunt for food for the family. Above ground, the harsh glory of that spectacular winter was coming to an end. Meltwater streamed down the valley, swelling the river to a mighty torrent. The flow increases every spring from the melting of the snows on Mount Hermon, but this was an exceptional year. As the days became warmer, the valley responded to its glut of water with a show of flowers such as is rarely seen. Round the shores of the eastern Mediterranean, carpets of red flowers cover the hillsides every spring. Anemones, turban buttercups, poppies, they bloom in turn for 4 glorious months. Each culture in the region has its own legend of love, betrayal and rebirth to explain the stupendous annual spectacle. A succession of other flowers attracts insects to pollinate them as they gather food for themselves and their young. The bee orchid attracts pollinators by mimicking a female bee. When a male comes to the flower intent on mating with it, a sticky pollen sac is attached to his head. He will pollinate the next bee orchid he visits. With spring comes Passover and the Christian feast of Easter. This is the favorite time of year for pilgrims who come from all over the world to be baptized in the waters of Jordan. As the waters warm up towards the end of March, the St. Peter's fish again begin to breed. They build nests by shifting sand with their mouths, and the males dispute their territories with raised fins and a ritual push of war, mouth to mouth at the invisible boundary line. Tilapia is a member of an African family of fishes at home here at the northern end of the Great African Rift Valley. It carries its eggs and later its young in its mouth until they're big enough to release into the open water. The streams that feed the lake from the north are boisterous in March as the spring brings new life to the river banks. The warmer weather draws out one of the local residents that has been secluded underground throughout the winter. The hyrax, like tilapia, is a typical animal of the Rift Valley. This is its northern limit, but it can be found all the way to southern Africa. It emerges in spring to feed on the fresh growth of grass and to start a new generation. A female hyrax has teats not only in the usual place on her belly, but also in front of her front legs. The only other animals with teats in a similar position are sea cows and elephants. The hyraxes and the whole riverside community received a severe shock in 1993. A new project had been planned to make use of the steep drop in the river between Lake Hula and the Sea of Galilee. A fall of more than 300 meters in only 11 kilometers invites exploitation for hydroelectricity. For the animals of the riverbank, it was a major disturbance. The project was necessary, it was said, for the future development of the country's economy. A small but vociferous opposition felt otherwise. In their opinion, there had been enough interference with the flow of the river. The nature conservation movement had become more active since it was first triggered by the drainage of the Hula Swamp. Chaining themselves to the machinery, they tried to prevent the project going ahead. By drawing national and international attention to the scheme, they hoped that the plans would be reconsidered. But it was not to be. The new canal was opened, and soon electricity from the Upper Jordan was flowing across the country. The first victim of the new power line was an osprey, carrying a fish away from the river to eat. The swift mountain stream cuts into its banks every winter. The cliffs it leaves behind make an ideal nesting habitat for birds that can burrow into the sandy soil. Every spring, bee-eaters return from Africa to breed in the cliffs along the Jordan. They're handsome, energetic visitors. Courting and mating beside the river, they bring a colourful reminder of the Jordan's African connections. They live up to their name, eating mostly bees and wasps, carefully removing the sting first. The pairs travel from Africa together, using the same nest site year after year with the same partner. The sandy cliffs are also home to a resident species of burrowing bird, the Smyrna kingfisher. Its 5 chicks have already hatched, 3 weeks after the eggs were laid. The kingfisher feeds more on land than in the water. It prepares the food for its chicks by beating it before taking it into the nest. The chicks are blind at this age, but they respond to the sound of their parents' arrival. Nearby, a grass snake has just finished laying her eggs in a damp and shady place under a rock. The eggs will lie here undisturbed for 2 months until they hatch. Their mother will never see her offspring. Since the dam was closed in 1964, the level of the lower Jordan has fallen enough to provide a new and safer nesting place for black-winged stilts. They normally nest in marshy places where they're liable to disturbance by boars and mongooses, but a few of them have now moved to the middle of the shallow stream. It's a convenient feeding place, and where groups of stones break the surface to make a tiny island, it's a good place to build a nest. The parents' damp breast feathers keep the eggs cool in the heat of late spring. The greatest danger here is not that the eggs might go cold. On the contrary, unless they're carefully tended, they'll be cooked in the sun. The female shades them with her body between periods of incubation. Another African species is nesting now among the cultivated date palms on the river bank. A small, secretive bird, often overlooked because of its superb camouflage, it's a Scops owl. As it gazes with half-closed eyes across the river, others of its African compatriots are thinking of moving on. For storks, Israel is a resting place on their journey further north to breed in Europe. Before the spring full moon has waned, they'll be on their way. One of the Asian animals in Israel's mixed fauna is on the move on this mild spring night. A jungle cat hunts for fish in the rocky shallows. This is the western limit of its range. At night, the Scops owl comes into its own. After the blinding glare of the day, the moon provides perfect light for hunting, and it has chicks to feed. The male passes food to the female, who distributes it to the owlets. Scops owls feed mostly on large insects, with occasional lizards or the young of other birds. The male keeps up a steady supply for his mates to feed to their brood. The youngest chick has to be fed with bite-sized pieces. When morning comes, the hunting will have to stop. so the later part of the night is a time of feverish activity. The larger owlets can be fed more efficiently. They can swallow the crickets whole. As the sun rises, the storks wait for the air to warm up, providing the right conditions for them to continue their journey. Both the surviving fox cubs have made it through the winter after losing their father in the snow. They come out in the cool morning sun to play until the day becomes too warm for comfort. Their mother is constantly in attendance to guard and feed them. A passing gazelle eyes them suspiciously. But they're not in the mood to hunt. They already have food. The remains of a young gazelle killed by their mother during the night provide breakfast for the cubs. Paler in colour and more slender in build, these are nevertheless the same species as the European fox, adapted to live in this warmer climate. Part of that adaptation is the urge to take cover as the day gets hotter. The warmth of the sun at last provides the conditions the migrant birds have been waiting for. As the ground heats up, spiral columns of rising air called thermals supply the lift they need to start them on their way. Pelicans and cranes and the storks too use the thermals to climb into the northerly airstream on the way to their breeding grounds. Soon the flocks that fill the air will be seen no more over the Jordan Valley, until they return in the autumn. The swirling winds at this time of year can pose problems for the human population which rebound onto the wildlife. Pesticide spraying is necessary to protect the crops, but although there are strict regulations about how and when it's done, a sudden change in the wind can produce a disaster. For the jungle cat, this seems like a free meal, a large catfish, unusually slow-moving and easy to catch. It's not so often that so handsome a meal can be had for so little effort. What the cat can't see, and would not understand if it could, is what has happened elsewhere in the stream. Although the spraying plane was the regulation half a kilometre from the water, a freak gust of wind carried a lethal dose of pesticide in the wrong direction. Once the accident had happened, the result was inevitable, and the effects spread a long way up the food chain. The bee-eater's 9 eggs have hatched, in the order in which they were laid, about 30 hours apart. This means that the oldest chick is 11 days older than the youngest. In the daily competition for food, the weakest will always be the losers, and the younger chicks have little chance of survival. In a good season, more of them might survive, but if food is short, only the strongest chicks will grow to be adult. Already, the youngest has died. The kingfisher works to a different system. Here, the eggs hatched closer together in time and the chicks are more equal in size. Although they squabble over the food, each has about the same chance of surviving. A scrub warbler caught by the adult will provide food for the day for one of the chicks. The question is, who gets it? The answer is nobody yet. It's not ready to be swallowed. The adult must break a few more of its bones before it's suitable for one fortunate youngster. Finally, the chick nearest the entrance, and the one least involved in the fighting, accepts the meal. Once it's been swallowed, it will take all day to digest. The bee-eaters have to work in a different way. The food they collect is nothing like as nutritious as the lizards and birds that the kingfisher feeds to its young. Insects are plentiful, but the chicks need enormous numbers of them. Each adult can bring as many as 50 insects every hour during the day to satisfy the hungry youngsters. Another of the smaller chicks is visibly backward in its development, with scarcely a trace of the feathers that the others have grown. It's unlikely to survive. But the older and stronger chicks will succeed, until the number that grows up is the maximum the season will allow. It's high summer now, hot and dry beside the river. Gazelles survive by eating seeds to supplement the tough, withered vegetation. They contain enough nutrition to enable a female to provide milk for her calf. Summer brings danger to the valley. The grass is tinder dry and the slightest spark can bring fires sweeping across the hillside. Their food supply gone, the gazelles must move higher in search of surviving vegetation. An exhausted wolf has no strength for the chase. The gazelle's stamp of alarm is unnecessary. The wolf is merely looking for somewhere cool to rest. Mother and calf can move away in safety. Whether the fire was started by natural causes or by human carelessness, some animals benefit from it. A group of storks enjoy a cooked meal, eating insects scorched by the flames. They seem insensitive to the heat of the smouldering ground. Grass fires are an annual event in the Jordan Valley in the dry months of summer. Summer is also the time for recreation among the human inhabitants. The river may be low, but it's not too low for play. On the Upper Jordan, whitewater rafting is a popular pastime, largely because it's cool and wet. To the tilapia, the water seems warm. At this time of year, they breed every 3 weeks, the adults releasing a cloud of growing fry into the water in time to start brooding a new clutch of eggs in their mouths. The population explodes, in the commercial fish ponds and in the lake. Down on the lower Jordan, anglers take their rods for sport, not for commerce. The stilts eggs are just about to hatch. The distraction display of the male would draw an inquisitive cat or a mongoose away from the nest, but the anglers ignore it. The female sits tight for as long as she can, but the disturbance finally drives her away. The eggs have started to hatch, but the 40-degree heat is too much for the chicks inside. Their life is over, just as it was about to start. 3 of the kingfisher's 5 chicks are still alive. The adults are busy now, bringing a wide-ranging selection of food for their babies. Reptiles, small mammals, frogs, even a snake, all are grist to the voracious mill. Their feathers are growing fast, and the chicks are using energy as never before. 1 lizard a day is no longer enough. If the kingfishers are busy, the bee-eaters are absolutely frenetic. Their chicks, of which 6 are still going strong, are greedier and more quarrelsome than ever, fighting amongst themselves while the parents are away. Sometimes the family squabbles are so fierce that the chicks don't even notice the arrival of their next meal. An arriving parent might be ignored or otherwise mobbed by its offspring. Under the rock where they've lain undisturbed for 2 months, the grass snake's eggs are hatching. The young snakes emerge perfectly formed and fully independent, programmed to seek water at the first opportunity for the safety it offers. After the cramped conditions of the egg, the world outside must seem vast. It holds dangers about which the young snake has a lot to learn, but instinct takes care of it on its first encounter. The mongoose cannot find it once it's reached the water. The second snake to hatch sets out on its trip to the water. The pace of change in the Jordan Valley has been so swift that some mistakes were inevitable. The drainage of the Hula Swamp was one of them. As the peaty soil dried and collapsed, it blew away down the valley in great dust clouds. Finally, it became apparent that the only way forward was back. Part of the valley was to be re-flooded, to the great satisfaction of the growing band of conservationists. They gathered to cheer as the dam was opened, to release the Jordan River back into its old course, and to increase the area of the life-giving swamp that so many residents and migrants depend on. Here, where the Jordan rests on its journey to the south, new papyrus beds will grow and new water lilies at the junction of 3 continents. 30 days after the first egg hatched, the young bee-eaters are nearly ready to leave the nest. and soon afterwards the country on their way back to Africa. An adult hovers temptingly just outside, holding food to draw the first chick to the entrance. After its last meal in the nest, the young bee-eater makes the greatest leap of its life. The kingfisher chicks, too, are preparing for freedom, grooming their new and as yet unused flight feathers. The adults wait impatiently outside the nest. After some hesitation, the first young bird takes the air. Above it, the migrants are returning from their breeding grounds on their way to winter in Africa. As the sky fills with the wings of another autumn, the season has come full cycle in the valley of the River Jordan. As rivers go, it's very small, only 160 kilometers from top to bottom. Beside the Amazon or the Nile, it's insignificant. But to the creatures that live in or pass through its valley, the Jordan is truly a river of life. To the people who live on its banks or visit its holy waters, it's more. A source of spiritual life, a gift for the world.